enjoy the music. Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you. And you are welcome to put your video on if you would like to. And if you choose not to, that's okay too. It's just good to be together.
Your volume is, your sound is not coming out very well.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's because I'm borrowing Starbucks Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So I probably should limit my talking. Aside from saying welcome to everyone. See you tonight for the third in a series of development of human consciousness, spiral dynamics. I would like to invite any one of you to start tonight to brave and give us your one sentence summary of the different colors that represent the stages of human consciousness. Starting with beige, for example, if you were to say beige, survival, is there anyone that would like to run through this color scheme and just give us one phrase or a word attached to each of those stages? This will take a little bravery on someone's part. Is there anyone that's feeling that tonight? And then we're going to hand it over to Nomali, who will take us into the next realms of our understanding of human consciousness. So either unmute yourself. Okay, Tim, you are on, Tim. And if you don't get it all right, you have a lot of support in this room, and we will help each other along.
Let's see. Purple is magical. Red is warrior tribalism. Blue is traditional, particularly religion, believing in only one God. And then we get to the present day, well, traditional and modern. What is that? Individualistic, achievement-oriented, scientific, individualistic. Green, pluralistic, relativistic, inviting, warm, feeling, consensus building. That's as far as I can go.
Okay, thanks for that, Tim.
Good.
We're gonna hand you and all the rest of us over to our teacher facilitator, and you can make any adjustments to anything that has been said. And hey, does this have to stop tonight? I mean, this has been so good. What are we gonna do? And I have a sense we need to dream up where we go from here, and maybe start with that next year. And I know I have in my mind something around the theme of listening, really deepening our listening experience. I know, Nomali, you have really done some great work with that in Integral Life, where, you know, And those of you who are part of the Integral Life community know exactly what I'm talking about here. There's this magic group of people in a room are really listening and engaged with each other, being to being, and something bigger happens in that room. It's like a source, it's like a logos that we are just drawn into, and we feel like, you know, what is this? This is bigger than any of us in this room. It's a kind of a where two or three are gathered, something lifts us into another realm, and part of the magic of that is the kind of listening that we're doing. So I'm hoping that we can maybe explore something like that. But if you have another idea, please let us know in the chat what it might be, because you know, it's the group that decides where something goes. I read a quote just the other day that basically said that when a group of people is together, that only that group of people can know where it goes next. It just is an amazing thing. And so rather than top down, somebody saying, oh, we're going to do this next, this kind of listening happens, we will know what our agenda is going forward. I'd like to kind of test that idea with us. So I just invite you to muse on that and contemplate on that, and let's see what happens. So Nomali, thank you again so much, and welcome, and we are yours.
No, thank you, Hardy. Hardy, maybe you can even put your email address on the chat field, and so if others have certain themes that they might like to be discussed, maybe they can send you an email or put it in the chat, of course, also. Yeah, so welcome everyone. I'm really excited today to enter the two last stages that certainly Clare Graves. Clare Graves is the main researcher who found, who sort of researched all of this and presented it. And then people like, as I've already mentioned, people like Don Beck, Christopher Coven, and even Ken Wilber, they are the ones who made that research more accessible and presentable to the world, and especially people like us here. So Clare Graves really sort of ended at what we will call turquoise, although some time later, others like Don Beck and Ken Wilber have added on to another 9th stage, which is coral, and we're not touching that coral stage. Yellow and turquoise are the colors that we will really talk about today. Yellow and turquoise are both extremely new, nascent, rare and uncommon as they are. So I want to invite all of us to enter this topic of talking about what we are referring to as second tier set of stages with a lot of humility, with sort of this understanding that these stages have been around for like a little tiny blip, or like even a micro tiny fraction of a blip when you think of humanity. So they're barely there. And we can be quite arrogant to think sometimes that we're there. On a good day, I like to imagine all of us are there. Many times we are in the first year stages often. So I'll share my screen. We ended with this yesterday. Can you all hear me okay and see my screen? Thumbs up, yeah? Okay, excellent. We talked about the 3 most common stages on our last gathering. We talked about blue, the traditional conformist stage. It's pretty ethnocentric, it's group-centric, it has this us versus them mentality. Blue really values purity, discipline, rules, and roles. Blue likes to have faith in a transcendent order or a higher order, tends to be religious, tends to be socially conservative, It wants to save humanity from egocentrism. The reason why I say that is because each stage evolves as a solution, or as a intended solution from the troubles and the struggles and the disasters of the stage that came prior to it. So blue comes after red, which we spoke on day one of this conversation. And red was the very egocentric, self-centered stage, which goes into tremendous amounts of indulgence and aggression even, and sort of way too much lust and like a complete lack of discipline. Everything is done to serve myself. Blue comes to say, there's not going to be a humanity left if each one of us are that egocentric. And so we're going to come and help you become much more community-centric. And you'll see in this way, each stage is solving a problem of the prior stage. So blue tries to save humanity from egocentrism. The next stage we spoke about is orange. What blue ends up doing is that it gets so involved in sort of an old-fashioned idea of religion. But you can imagine 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, this is a very different era of civilization. So there's a lot of dogma. There's a lot of, you should believe it if the Bible says so, or if the Buddha says so, or whatever. You know, if a higher authority says you should believe it, then you're supposed to believe it. Orange tries to solve that problem, or it hits a wall by feeling like, wait a minute, all this sort of subjective, like the perennial philosophical ideas of here's how the world is. It's no longer something I want to believe in. I want to have ideas of my own. I want to see who I am outside of this, outside of the group. So it begins to have this objective, rational, scientific, I can think for myself, thank you very much, kind of idea. It's all, we can measure everything in the world. We can find data about everything in the world. So this becomes much more evolved from just the group-centric mentality. It becomes a little bit more world-centric. It really values rationality and science, individualism, democracy, capitalism, materialism, risk-taking, adventure, and it wants to save humanity from the dogma of blue. And this is mainly what we refer to as the Western Enlightenment. That's where it all began. And this era of Western Enlightenment and this rational, objectivist, scientific era has been around a long time, and they're naturally driven to score big, to accomplish, to achieve, to build roads where no roads have been built. And so what ends up happening is the problem that orange creates is that it loses any sense of heart, any sense of kind of that beautiful sense of belonging in a community sense. It loses everything to measurable data points. So it really has no sense of a kind of a subjective space, or neither does it have any value for much intersubjective space. Everything is about systems and structures and you know, how do we make get the biggest bang for the buck? That's a very orange statement. And so green comes along because orange has exploited the world, has exploited the planet, and our environment is suffering, our climate is suffering. There are less relationships that are thriving. There's a lot of depression and anxiety that comes out of this modern orange rational stage. And so green comes to save humanity from exploitation and the domination and the objectivism of orange. So green is world-centric still, furthermore world-centric, and they're very social-centric. They're ecocentric. They value pluralism and equality. They really have a deep sensitivity to the ways in which people, animals, women, or this kind of marginalized groups, they begin to really notice marginalized groups, indigenous groups. So they have a deeply, highly developed sense of sensitivity to not letting those wrongs continue, wrongs of hierarchy, for example, civil rights, environmentalism. Blue is very religious. Green is spiritual, but not religious. You'll hear a lot of people saying that in today's world. And this has been around for about 150 years, but really it's around the Vietnam War, women's rights, civil rights, all of that really came into being in a much louder fashion around the 1960s. So these are the three most common stages that are around in the world. Some would say, I don't know exactly how they would have done the research, but some would in general, sort of looking at consensus, looking at the way people vote, for example, in North America or in the United States at the very least, some would say that there's 30% of each of these stages, 30% blue, 30% orange, and 30% green at this time. And this is where a lot of the culture wars take place. The culture wars are really a battle mostly between blue and green. So let's go to the next stage. Oops, I should have done this earlier. So after green, according to Clare Graves, who did the preliminary research of this, the bulk of the research for spiral dynamics, he felt that there was something really bizarre happened. That there is a quantum leap, are the words that he used. He realizes, or he felt in his research, that some members of society, with the completion of the green meme and the first year stages, I'll come back to first year in a little bit, human consciousness is poised for a quantum leap into second tier being, also referred to as the integral stages. At these integral stages, we start to see for the first time in history that all of the previous stages exist in ourselves in the same way that we saw them evolving through civilization, through history. We can actually see them in ourselves. So it's not just that, oh, these church-going nutcases and these gun-toting, Southerners here, I think they are the blue people. I'm not like that. Or, oh, these climate deniers, I'm not one of them. Or these woke people, I'm not one of them. That's how we tend to see ourselves primarily. But when we come to the integral stages, we begin to other them less, and we begin to see what is other in ourselves. This is the first time really that human consciousness is able to see that, oh, you know what I see out there is actually in me as well. All of these stages are in me. So it causes a certain humility to arise in us. It causes a certain kind of a sobering up. We become sober when we have that realization. None of the first year stages are capable of acknowledging other stages as valid. Okay, so orange can never really look at blue and feel that, oh yeah, they're religious people, they have the right to be just as they are. Typically, they will tend to sort of mock them or denigrate them as typically as less than me, or sometimes also wrong. There's a strong othering that is going on in all first year stages. So no first year stage, meaning beige, purple, red, blue, orange, and green, neither of them are actually able to see that this is a natural progression of evolution. Only the integral stages are capable of really beginning to see that. The first tier tends to see the world from a fear-based place. Second tier, meaning the stages that we're going to talk about today, they seem to see the world from a being-based space. You'll understand all of this once we start talking about the stages more, but I'm just sort of setting the stage of this shift, this quantum leap that is about to take place. First tier tends to approach the world from a place of deficiency and lack. There's something awfully wrong and missing, therefore and usually someone else is to be blamed for that. Second tier typically tends to see the world from a place of abundance. We have so much, and there's so much we can do. It's only second tier that becomes aware of the previous stages. Only second tier can truly transcend each of those other stages while also including them, and preferably including all the healthier aspects of those stages. So where are we heading? We're heading into these integral stages where the word itself means to integrate, to bring together, to join, to link, to embrace. Not in the sense of uniformity, and not in the sense of ironing out all the wonderful differences, colors, zigs and zags. Hardy, can you admit Jolene? Please? Yeah, thanks, got it. Not in the sense of uniformity and not in the sense of ironing out all the wonderful differences, colors, zigs and zags of a rainbow-hued humanity, but in the sense of unity in diversity, shared commonalities along with our wonderful differences, replacing rancor with mutual recognition, hostility with respect, inviting everybody into the tent of mutual understanding. This sounds like green, but you'll see how this is also going to be very different. So we've done instinctive, beige, purple magical, red impulsive, blue traditional, orange modern, and green postmodern. And now you can see that gap where this becomes the first tier, the first set of stages. These 6 stages are referred to as the first tier. And then the second tier stages are yellow and turquoise, which we will talk about. Yellow is very integrative, it's systems thinking oriented. Turquoise is universal, it is very harmonizing oriented. So here we come. So let's start with what is referred to typically as an early integral stage, yellow. Perhaps most importantly, yellow begins to see the process of development itself. So like I said, the first tier stages, beige through green, they don't actually see others as a part of this process of evolution. Certainly they don't see them as a natural evolution, that it's a sequential evolution of consciousness. So yellow begins to see the process of development itself. Each previous stage, beige through green, has and will continue to play a critical role in the evolution of civilization, culture, and self. Yellow sees that each previous stage reveals an important truth and pulls them all together and integrates them without needing to make them be more like me. That's what we tend to do when we're caught in ego. And we are caught in ego more when we are in the first tier stages, when we feel that someone different is wrong, therefore they ought to be more like me. Everyone else is somewhat of a slightly faulty version of me. That's how we tend to see. Yellow begins to see that, you know what? Everybody gets to be who they are. They don't need to think like me. They don't need to need what I need. They don't have to feel what I feel. They don't have to want what I want. Suddenly, a new understanding of our history and how we have evolved, and that lets us know that we are going to continue to evolve. We see evolution as ongoing at this point. Yellow does more than just see all points of view, which is something green is really good at doing. Yellow can see and honor them, but also critically evaluate them. So we can really bring discernment. So green likes to imagine that everyone is the same. But actually, everyone is not the same. There are certain people we would not want as leaders because they're morally or ethically bankrupt. So they're not the same, right? So we can actually start to make certain distinctions here. We have new insights about what we call a hierarchy is. One of the best insights we get at Yellow is that there are two types of hierarchies. One is a dominator hierarchy, which is what green fights against. And a dominator hierarchy is real. Dominator hierarchies do exist. But because green doesn't see what a natural hierarchy is, green tends to think that all hierarchies are dominator hierarchies, that everyone's out to get me. And that's not true. At Yellow, we begin to see, such as the spiral dynamic stages of evolution are actually a natural hierarchy. It's not a dominator hierarchy. Green is not supposed to be dominating orange. Orange is not supposed to be dominating blue. It just happens to be that that's how these levels of complexity evolved. And because each stage doesn't know any better, domination happened. And Yellow can begin to fix that. Yellow is the first level that embraces multiple perspectives. It really, truly seeks out and embraces multiple perspectives. This is the stage at which there is the deepest level of self-awareness. We can really begin to sort of separate out assumptions and opinions we make. We can look at them objectively. We can begin to see things like, oh, that's my assumption. It's not necessarily a fact. That's an assumption that I have. How this is, I can't actually see this. Where is this? Can somebody, if someone is able to see that first bullet point, can you read it? It's covered on my screen somehow. Maybe it's, Hardy, are you able to see that bullet point on the other side?
Values, flexibility, contextuality, functionality, discernment, skillful means, creativity, analysis.
That's right. These are some of the things that Yellow really values. I can see from there onwards. Knowledge and competency supersede rank, power, status of or group. Differences are welcome. Everyone doesn't need to be or do or feel the same way as I do. Personal freedom is important, but without harming others. Chaos, change, paradox are all seen as a natural part of growth, evolution, our lives. Yellow begins to realize that I can actually be really effective and strategic in how I communicate to get the maximum or the best outcomes. So for example, once we know the language or the grammar of each of the first tier stages, we can actually speak in that same language. We can translate to speak that language. So it's not necessarily a different language, although it can seem like that. So let's say, for example, climate issues are a really big, important thing right now. The problem is, how do you make that importance be seen to red? Well, perhaps you can translate and say, hey, you know, your house and your job is really important to you. And with climate change, your job, you could lose your job. You could really, if you don't buy into this idea that there is danger in this, you could end up looking stupid. So red is actually really concerned about how I look, how I show up, what my image is. So if you can speak in the red grammar or red language, you can actually make certain concepts be more make it more accessible to them. Speak to them in a way that they understand, that they grasp the value of it. You can speak in terms of God's desire for a healthy planet for all of God's children, which could be one way that blue traditional conformist religious people could be given ideas of climate issues. Okay, so that's what I mean by yellow translates to other stages for best outcomes. You might hear, if any of you are in learning to be a coach or a therapist, you have probably heard one of the best ways that we stay present to our clients is by meeting them where they're at. That's that concept. You meet someone where they're at. That concept is basically translating to their language, their grammar. And you do it with compassion. You do it only if it is going to bring about something good for the world. Systems thinking, systems theory, quantum mechanics, cognitive science, integral theory, these are all very yellow schools of thought. Yellow is really good at pattern detecting, bridge building, map making. Yellow is suddenly very good at sort of seeing patterns of how things emerge. And because yellow is able to see history with new eyes, all of you have now seen all those stages. Yellow can sort of re-enter some of the things that it has perhaps dismissed. We can actually re-enter them from a new and higher perspective with more discernment. So we can come back to purple enchantment. We appreciate that magical, whimsical beauty of that magical stage. We can come back to self-emphasis or taking self-care even, which is a red value. We can come back to religion. We don't have to give up our religion. We can come to our religion from a higher perspective, from a higher understanding. Not all religious practice is dogmatic. We see that at yellow. We can come back to science and rationality. We can come back to cultural sensitivity of green with a little bit more discernment and understanding. And we'll see a video of how that happens later. Yellow tends to be heady. It tends to be kind of thinking oriented, head heavy, intellectual, analytical, visionary. It's also very individualistic. And it's very new. It's been around only for about 50 years or so. Somewhat sort of typically speaking. Multiple perspectives. We'll just go through a couple of images that capture these ideas of early integral theory, which is the theory developed by Ken Wilber. If you want to ever pick up a book like A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber, or The Marriage of Sense and Soul, you'll begin to really see what these integral ideas really mean. Spirituality becomes important or begins to be important at yellow because there is a real truth of less and lesser degrees of ego attachment. Not saying that ego is gone by any means, it's not, but we're beginning to have a little bit more release and relief from the ego's attachment, ego's grasping. There are lots of people are using integral to talk about how we can reinvent our systems and our organizations, such as Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations. There are lots of books people have written on integral education, integral psychotherapy. All kinds of people are taking integral ideas and applying them in their own world. Holacracy is something that someone called Brian Johnson developed as an organizational governance methodology that is considered to be integral. Braver Angels, any organization that is actually trying to create some kind of integration between two polarizing groups, I think they're attempting to do something that is integral. So Braver Angels is an organization that is trying to heal the divide of the highly polarized Republican Democrat camps in the United States. There are lots of podcasters, there are lots of sort of cultural creatives and commentators that are, I think, coming potentially from an integral stage of development. Coleman Hughes is one of them. He speaks a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion type of topics from a sort of an integral perspective. Jeff Salzman, who runs a podcast called The Daily Volver, he is always talking about these integral ideas. Marshall McLuhan, who is a Canadian who came up with the idea of the global village way back, really was, if you look, I'm not going to quote him on this, but if you just Google Marshall McLuhan global village, you'll see some of the things that he were predicting about what a global village means is very integral thinking. So who else is doing integral ideas? Institute for Cultural Evolution. This is a very integral idea, this idea of creating a win-win-win solution. For whom is integral trying to create a win-win-win solution? For blue traditional, for orange modern, and for green postmodern. Our policies should be written in such a way that as best as we can, are creating a win for blue, a win for orange, and a win for green. Where the culture wars are really taking place, where the polarization is most taking place, Integral will do its darndest to try and create policies that are actually offering a win for each of these different value systems. So if you go to the Institute of Cultural Evolution website, you'll see they have this platform of policy recommendations where they have actually begun to write policy documents for abortion rights, big tech governance, homelessness, education, climate change, immigration, some of these big sort of hot button topics. They're still basic documents, but they are teaching how to actually take that integral view. So by my saying this, remember that with integral, this new quantum leap that has taken place and this new early integral stage, what it is starting to do, if it does nothing, and if the only thing it ever does is develop a beautiful appreciation for all of the first year stages, that alone is enough, because it doesn't happen until this time in history. Integral Life, if anybody wants to check it out, is a website that has a lot of integral ideas, integral events, lots of things happen there where you're always invited to join. So let's watch this.
Comrades, members of the choir, we would only interrupt such beautiful music for something truly important. Please welcome President Mandela.
Let me pause for just a moment before I continue to play that. Try to see what you can see here as a really, what's happening is that the Springboks, which was the South African rugby team, was a cause of deep division during apartheid. And the South Africans, or I should say Black South Africans, never felt like they were a part of this incredible, sport. So sometimes Black South Africans would go to Springboks games. They were playing with other countries just to cheer for the other country and not really cheer their own South African team. Why? Because the South African team, although they were called South Africans, it was all white. Basically, it was an all-white team. So it caused a lot of rift. It was just a very, during apartheid, all of this was incredibly painful inside South Africa. Nelson Mandela came into being a leader, and he could have led very differently. If he, in some ways, if he was a green-only leader, he probably would not have achieved what he would have achieved. He probably would have actually taken a very extreme perspective of diversity, inclusion type of ideas, and actually made the white people of the country not a part of the new South Africa that he was really wanting to create. So this movie clip from the movie Invictus is really about how he wants to deal with the rugby team, with the Springboks, and how he's looking at this potential hugely polarizing issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Smile.
Brothers, sisters, comrades, I am here because I believe you have made a decision with insufficient information and foresight. I am aware of your earlier vote. I am aware that it was unanimous. Nonetheless, I believe we should restore the Springboks. Restore their name, their emblem, and their colors immediately. Let me tell you why. On Robben Island, in Portsmouth prison, all of my jailers were Afrikaners. For 27 years, I studied them. I learned their language, read their books, their poetry. I had to know my enemy before I could prevail against them. And we did prevail, did we not? All of us here, we prevailed. Our enemy is no longer the Afrikaner. They are our fellow South Africans, our partners in democracy. And they treasure Springbok rugby. If we take that away, we lose them. We prove that we are what they feared we would be. We have to be better than that. We have to surprise them with the compassion, with restraint and generosity. I know all of the things they denied us. But this is no time to celebrate petty revenge. This is the time to build our nation, using every single brick available to us, even if that brick comes wrapped in green and gold. You elected me your leader. Let me lead you now. Who is with me on this?
I was part of the main committee for the inauguration of Nelson Mandela as the first democratically elected leader of South Africa. After the election, there was a hue and cry, especially amongst Black South Africans, not to have the Springbok as the emblem for South African sport, because it represented depression, it represented exclusivity, it represented white domination. But then Nelson Mandela felt that reconciliation was important.
There is a real possibility, if we review our decision, and accepted the Springbok for rugby as our symbol, we will unite the country. And that victory over the All Blacks will make their achievement even more significant. That the whole country, black and white, was behind them. And they must go to the field fully motivated, knowing that they will bring glory to South Africa.
I was there when we won the World Cup. This extremely excited level of emotion found expression in so many different ways. As we walked out of the stadium, you saw hundreds of black people who previously didn't even come to a rugby game because it was considered part of the white man's apartheid system, running around just shouting at the top of their voices, "Ama boko boko, ama boko boko."
We never experienced this. This is our first time. He's very proud of him and very proud of the book.
You have to experience that to really understand the unifying force of sport. That occasion where Mr. Mandela came out with the number 6 rugby jersey, with Francois, the captain, did so much towards racial reconciliation in this country.
By proclaiming the message of one team, one country, rugby in South Africa, once a symbol of division and exclusion, had indeed crossed the threshold to a new era of a united and reconciled nation.
So let me just stop there for a moment. Brings tears to my eyes when I see that video. What do you think? What do you think about this integral stage and what you see in it as different from all of the other first-year stages? What comes to your mind? How is an integral leader different, or I should say a yellow leader different from perhaps a blue leader or a green leader or an orange leader, or certainly a red leader? I think we had a red leader in this country who still has a lot to say. What do you think is unique about a yellow leader? There's some stuff on this chat field. And riddle and moving scene, a wonderful leader, incredible and moving scene. We all have to get along for everyone's benefit. Yes. And in that, what I'm also hearing is that sometimes we have to give up. And Mandela took a big risk, when he walks into his own community and he says, we have to welcome the Springboks. He took a big risk. Integral leaders are willing to take a risk, even, taking a risk at the expense of perhaps my own people going against me. It's a very risky move. It's a difficult thing to do, Notice how he spoke the language of his own people. Notice how he also talked about how he had to learn the language of the Afrikaners who imprisoned him. Okay. He had to learn their poetry. He had to become friends with them. In other words, meet them where they are at. Okay.
Nomali,
Yeah.
just to widen the question even more than answering it, I'm curious thoughts are how yellow plays out when it comes to issues like assisted dying or vaccination?
I'm not hearing you very well, Hardy.
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, still not?
Oh, that's better.
Okay, so how would yellow play out when it comes to issues like assisted dying, vaccination, safe injection sites, abortion? Does it mean that different parts of the country are free to be who they are and others not so much? Do we loosen our grip, what it is to be a country, and let go of some of that blue and make things more territorial? And I'm just curious how complex this comes out looking in terms of holding to our convictions and at the same time not holding others to those convictions. Any
Yes.
further thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. It's extremely complex for sure. Integral leadership is definitely not the end all and be all. Integral leadership, in the way that I look at it, so yellow leadership would actually be the most effective if it can be contextual. Remember, I think I had that value up there. So if an integral leader is in a place where they really do have very religious context to how they come up with policies, the best that a yellow person can do is, how can I encourage this community to be exactly where they're at and help them become healthy in exactly where they're at? If it's a blue stage, then how can I help them become more healthy blue and help them see what is not so healthy in blue? Not easy to do. One thing we all forget is that if you look at, for example, the blue stage, the Romantic era, that lasted thousands of years before the Western Enlightenment came. The Western Enlightenment has been around roughly, even though we say 300, 400 years, it's been around roughly for about 1,000 years to now. Look at how long it takes for a certain era to go through a change, to experience a big shift. So first thing, as integral leaders, we have to remember to be patient. So we cannot force policies to change immediately. We start small, like the way the Institute of Cultural Evolution, and I posted how they are starting to present policy recommendations. We have to start really small at grassroots levels. One of the things that is really problematic, we'll talk about the pathologies. Remember how for every other stage, we talked about the dignity and the disaster of that stage? We'll do the same thing with yellow and turquoise as well. I'm going to do it as a whole, sort of an integral stage pathologies, the drawbacks of these higher stages. But one that I can already say is that as we enter these later stages of development, we are, in a sense, becoming less and less attached to what we need, because we're less and less attached to ego. So in that sense, we're also calmer, more peaceful, relaxed, hopefully. But what that also means is that we're not becoming activists. We're not out on the street fighting for what we really believe in. We kind of sort of intellectually resolve matters and then just stay home and then complain that, oh, this is the kind of person that is winning Arizona, and this is the kind of person who's winning in Texas. So we become armchair philosophers and armchair, kind of fixing everything in the books and in groups like this. We're not actually out there acting. So in order to resolve or best offer policy recommendations for those hot button issues that you mentioned, Hardy, euthanasia or vaccinations or whatever, all the hot topics, war. First is not to get tricked into believing that we can fix it all and fix it overnight or even in a couple of years. I think it's decades, if not generations worth of work that we'll have to start now. So it's probably not the answer that you'd want to hear, Hardy. So guess what? Yellow, oh yes, Phyllis. You're still muted, Phyllis. Not hearing. You're still muted. I don't know. We can't, I know you're trying to say something. Has the host, it seems like maybe the host has muted everyone, or has to unmute.
Now I can do it. Okay, can you hear me? Now I have to remember what I was going to say. Okay. Do you think that it's reasonable to say that that whereas first tier tends to divide by issue, second tier looks to transcend and include by value and virtue?
Yes, but I think because second tier is willing to discern and evaluate and bring critical thought, I think it will also make certain value judgments that are maybe a little bit more difficult, that maybe perhaps green wouldn't like, for example. So I don't know if that makes sense, Phyllis. Does that, ask me the question again. First tier is issue based. Is that what you said?
Right, the first tier tends to be issue based and second tier tends to be more value based and virtue based and aspirational towards those rather than towards being right on an issue.
Yeah. So I would say second tier is context based.
Is context.
Context based.
Gotcha.
So I think second tier will make some sort of a discernment, an evaluation based on the context of what the issue is, where is it arising, the semiotics type of decision making, right? So I think it'll try to value, or it'll decipher the values of its audience. Who are we trying to serve? You know, so it's sort of like in Sri Lanka, when we had this long ongoing civil war. Sri Lanka at that time culturally was very much a sort of a red warring community, maybe like red blue, and then the peacekeeping negotiators were Norwegian. Norwegians used to come and offer Sri Lanka these green solutions, which made no sense for a Sri Lankan civil war situation, right? So could they have done better contextually? That actually brings me to a really good point that I almost forgot. One of the other reasons why I showed the South African video is because Don Beck is the teacher of spiral dynamics, one of the teachers. He actually went to South Africa a lot in the 80s. He actually was a consultant in trying to correct the wrongs of apartheid and to actually get out of apartheid. There are South African newspaper clippings of this American man called Don Beck, who is apparently said to have even met with advisors to Mandela, and is supposed to have taught him how to speak to the different stages. And Don Beck, and this might seem like a really, just bear with me. I think it's a great story. When Don Beck was first invited to South Africa, there were very sort of rural communities into which he would go. And these were mostly Black South Africans who were very downtrodden in their lives, full of poverty. And they were also in a very red cultural setting, a red consciousness level of being. This is back in the 80s. And the boys' toilet was apparently supposed to be ghastly, hideous. It was just stinking awful. And Don Beck came up with an idea to try and offer discipline to the young boys who were using the toilet. What did he do? He went to the urinals and he's supposed to have pasted stickers of a red target. Boys being boys, were the minute they see a target, they wanted to urinate, pee at the target. Okay, that's a very contextual, strategic solution to a red problem. You know how red is very undisciplined. You put a target on the urinal, the little boys are going to want to point at that. All of a sudden, they had very clean toilets. The boys became much more disciplined because they started urinating at the targets. So that's very contextual. I think that's what I mean by second-tier solutions. They're never going to be black and white. There's going to be a lot of gray. It's never going to be one size fits all, right? It's not just for values, neither is it just for issues. It's really what's the context of what's going on. Okay, let's move on to turquoise. And I want to have a good deal of time for us to do Q&A today. So let's move on to turquoise, which is the next stage that is the final stage that we're going to be talking about today. So what's happening when this new shift comes along is that, so yellow is very heady. It's very intellectual. Remember how every stage is, and every new stage is arising out of a need to fix the struggle of the previous stage. So yellow is very heady, it's intellectual, it's very individualistic, it sort of digs its own hole in the sense of trying to fix everything and do everything on its own. So turquoise is sort of coming with a much more broader, heart-centered place. It's actually coming from much more wanting to be receptive to the world than go ahead and like fix everything. So let's see. Yellow is more head-centered, turquoise is more heart-centered. Yellow is more analytical, turquoise is more receptive. Yellow is more self-expressing, turquoise is self-sacrificing. Yellow is individualistic, turquoise is going to be collectivistic. Yellow is idealistic. It really is very hopeful and idealistic. Yellow is beautiful in the sense that, oh my God, we can see so many problems and we can fix so much. And turquoise actually becomes a little bit more grounded and realistic. Yellow is very excited. Turquoise is a little bit more humble and surrendered because it sees even more into the realities of the world. Yellow is more loving, at least tries to be, and turquoise is actually more forgiving. Forgiving of all the wrongs that have happened to humanity and everything that has been done. So instead of trying to fix everything right away, it's actually more, it begins from a place of surrender and forgiving. Yellow wants to know, turquoise, it's okay not to know everything. It's okay. I don't know everything. I don't have all the solutions. So let's go into this. The turquoise stage is sometimes referred to as the universalist or the alchemist. So first things first, there is actually not that much enough data because there's actually very few societies or members of society that we can see are turquoise. So it's speculative, and whatever research that has happened, mostly by Clare Graves, Suzanne Greuter, Robert Keegan, a lot of them have also admitted to the fact that the little bit of research that is available was mostly done in the Western world, Western educated people, mostly white people, mostly English-speaking people, or English speakers who were speaking English fluently as a second language. So it's not really a very global, universal slice of the pie. However, there's enough to project. Turquoise intuitively, not analytically, but intuitively grasps the entire spiral of development, all of those stages, and thus understands and embodies the significance of each stage. Turquoise grasps big pictures, global networks, universal networks. Being holistic is routine for turquoise. The self is a part of a larger conscious spiritual whole that also does not negate the self. So we are self-sacrificing, but not so much that you are just kind of a complete doormat. You can take very tough decisions at turquoise. Our lifestyles are becoming much more minimalist because it really is just very conscious of the ways in which the world is suffering. Turquoise has a profound concern for the well-being of humanity and the planet, willing to sacrifice own beliefs for the greater good of the whole. Deep spiritual and mystical connections, deep spiritual energies. Turquoise is the stage at which there is a very sort of like a true mystical divine connection that really comes into being. Turquoise welcomes an open mind around transpersonal beings, beings and non-local entities. They're actually willing to explore that more. Expanded use of human brain, mind tools and competencies. True servant leadership really comes about in turquoise. There's the least amount of ego in the spiral is in turquoise. Turquoise is able to translate complexity into coherent, pragmatic simplicity. And this is an act of compassion. Turquoise leaders are not, there are lots of leaders who just love complexity and they get a sort of an ego trip out of, oh, I must sound really important if my teaching or my theory or whatever is extremely complex. Turquoise says to hell with all that. Turquoise tries to make it accessible, available to as many as possible. And it's not about ego and trying to make things really complicated. It's actually, how can we make it simple? Turquoise can be very tapped into sort of meta theories, meta motivations, meta aware. There's a lot of sort of metaphysics. There's a lot of meta going beyond in turquoise. That can also get them in trouble. And let's see, once again, I cannot see the first bullet point for some reason. I'm going to just go beyond that and read the second one. Ease and trust even in the midst of uncertainty. Construct aware, ego aware. This is an important development in turquoise, meaning that at this stage of development, we're actually beginning to see that what I see, my sense of self, my beliefs, they're all actually constructed, typically by me or by culture. That sense of knowing that they are constructed, I'm able to witness that. I'm able to witness my own ego constructing realities about myself, about others. That level of being able to witness, being able to see that construction is a very beautiful thing of the turquoise level of development. Strong perception of interconnectedness, interbeing, which comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, and the optimal fittedness concept, which comes from cognitive science. These are very true for turquoise. There's no boundary. There's this up from Eden is a beautiful idea that says that we're not falling. We're actually moving up from Eden. We haven't fallen from Eden. We're not such sort of sinners that we are falling into hell and going to hell. In fact, we can actually rise from Eden to even greater heights, greater depths. The witnessing capacity, I won't go much into this, but this is kind of comes from sort of meditation and such, this ability to witness our level of our state of being, our consciousness. This is a sort of a state that is being developed at turquoise. Turquoise is more collectivist, sacrifices self and other for the good of the most. Turquoise really embraces opposites. They're not polarizing kind of disaster zones. In fact, we can try to see how we can find unity in the opposites. There's a lot more surrender, humility, acceptance, joy, and humor because there's less ego. Turquoise makes room for energetic connection. So really sort of non-local, empirical things there's a lot more room and curiosity in turquoise for that kind of thing. Seeks harmony and synergy between all forms of life. Turquoise is cosmos driven and views us as a small part of a bigger web and the mystery of life. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to come back to the health of these higher stages, but let's talk a little bit about integral stages in general. So yellow and turquoise, how do we get in trouble at these higher stages? We mistake the map for the territory. So just because we learn about spiral dynamics, none of us should be running around thinking, oh, now that I know that, turquoise is the highest stage, I must be turquoise. So, we learn the maps and then we think that we are in the territory. We learn certain theories and think that we're actually practicing that or embodying that. So this is a big mistake that happens. Spiritual bypassing. Everything is sort of spiritual and mystical and beautiful. And so I don't need to worry about all the problems of the marketplace. My relationships are probably falling apart and I'm leaving a trail of dead bodies behind me because I'm a jerk. But life is so spiritual. So this spiritual bypassing happens. There's arrogance and judgment that can happen because we think we are higher than everyone else or more developed or evolved. Higher stages can become impatient with ourselves, with others, and the world. We just know that there is so much potential for the world, and then the higher stages, we can become impatient. And so we can become frustrated. There's not enough change happening fast. Hardy, I'm looking at you. I'm kidding. Transcend and exclude rather than transcend and include. Theoretically explain everything and do nothing. Just like the armchair philosophy, right? We can explain everything through these amazing theories, and then we sit at home doing nothing. Too much being in the clouds and not enough in the marketplace. The ivory towers, the higher stages can hang out in the ivory towers too much. Pathological behaviors can be camouflaged. You know the concept of gaslighting? I think in some ways, these higher stages can gaslight themselves even. It's like, oh, well, I'm doing this because I'm doing it with awareness, or, it's kind of finding excuses for bad behavior. Can truly become very detached and dissociated from reality. Growth can become an escape. Okay. And sometimes at higher stages, we can forget that there's more to come actually. Like we kind of feel like, okay, I'm at my highest, or we have reached the highest, and we forget that there's more to come, which means there's so much more complexity that is yet to emerge. This I find is a very sort of humility of the turquoise or the integral stages. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. That's a real calling for something higher. And that it takes real humility for someone to be able to see that and say that. Turquoise sees us not human as we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. That's a kind of a turquoise statement. Oops. to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. William Blake. Everything is good as it is, and tomorrow everything needs to change. Okay, we're not, higher stages don't sit around in that spiritual bliss that everything's fine, everything's good, we're all good, same, you know. We're not kind of going into these dreamy places. We can, but we better not remember to come back to the marketplace and do the work. Abide in hope and take up genuine action. Deep gratefulness for and forgiving of all experience, no matter what. The sense of gratefulness is really true. It's really true. So let's stay with this for a moment.
How about getting off of these antibiotics? How about stopping eating when I am full of? How about them trying to spare untangling carrots? How about that ever-elusive could-oh? Thank you, India. Thank you, terror. Thank you, disillusionment. Thank you, frailty.
happy lately, thinking about the good things to come. And I believe it could be something good has begun. Oh, I've been smiling lately, dreaming about the world as one. And I believe it could be someday it's going to come. 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Yeah, I've been smiling lately, thinking about the good things to come. And I believe it could be something good has begun. Oh, peace train sounding louder, ride on the peace train. Ooh, ooh. Come on, the peace train. It's peace train, holy roller. Everyone jump on the peace train. Ooh, ooh. Come on, the peace train. Get your bags together. Go bring your good friends too. 'Cause it's getting nearer. It soon will be with you. Come and join the living. It's not so far from you. And it's getting nearer. Soon it will all be true. Oh, peace train sounding louder. Ride on the peace train. Oh, come on, the peace train. Peace train. Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? 'Cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Oh, peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Oh, peace train sounding louder, ride on the peace train. Come on, the peace train. It's peace train, holy roller. Everyone jump up on the peace train. Ooh. Come on, come on, come on. Yes, come on, peace train. Hey, yes, it's the peace train.
Okay. So before I stop, let's just do a little bit of a recap again. We started with where we all began and where we will all end, which is the beige survivalist stage. Okay. It is our first being in this world as just merely trying to survive. There isn't even that much of a difference between the way animals survive and humans would survive. We're living off of the land. And at some point, those individuals felt that it might actually help to get together and form small tribes of people, small communities of people. It helped them survive and find water, find food. And so that is this tribal purple stage, where the wisdom of the tribal leader is deeply driving safety for them, provide security for the people. They have a magical connection to the earth. They have a magical connection to everything, really. From the way the sun falls on the water to the snow-capped mountaintops, it's all a beautiful, deep connection. At some point, however, this is also where tribal sacrifices, and you might have to sort of sacrifice your child if the rain doesn't come. So there's a little bit of problems even in this small, uncontacted tribal living systems that existed, out of which a couple of members of that society, or one even, might feel that, wait a minute, I'm not going to sit around this fire singing our songs. I have a life to live. I have something of who I am that I am yet to discover. And that red warrior level of consciousness emerges then, where one feels that I have something to say. I am somebody. The ego is really beginning to come alive here. And the red stage, left unto its own devices, it will eventually get in trouble because it is so egocentric. It will want power. It wants to indulge in everything to serve the self. And so that becomes a huge problem, which is why blue then arises out of that, because it's sort of like the lost man finding a church, seeking God. I need to be saved. Take me to your community. I want someone with whom I can belong. So the blue traditional stage provides the discipline that the red was deeply yearning eventually. And it provides rules and regulations, and it provides community and belonging. And it begins to see that we together are beautiful. Unfortunately, it can also go to the place where it might feel we together are beautiful and only we are beautiful together. Those other people, I don't know about them. They are the heretics. They're the traitors. They don't believe in the same God, or they don't love their children like we love our children, or becomes very ethnocentric. And so the dogma of that traditional belief system that is so conformist and believes only our ideas gives rise to the scientific orange stage that says, listen, I can make up my own mind. I have dreams to fulfill. I don't have to buy into your dogma to find my joy or my success. So I'm going to go out there. I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to make a bunch of money. And I don't need these belief systems. I can find things that I can prove scientifically, objectively are true. And so eventually that too runs into a dark hole of having no meaning. Everything is about numbers and measuring and tools and systems and data points, that all of a sudden, I don't know where my heart is anymore. People are being discriminated against based on how much money they make, or the color of their skin, or their race and gender, or their gender identity, whatever it is, people are being discriminated against because orange is just trying to make money or be successful. And so green arises out of a deep sensitivity to noticing that there's so much more than just this scientific objective truth. People matter, animals matter, the underprivileged, the underrepresented matter. And science isn't the only truth. Each one of us can create the truth of our own. And that gives rise then to its own problems where there is no truth at all. Everything is flattened. Every hierarchy is wrong or seen or perceived as a dominator hierarchy. Forgets to see that the wrongs of the past perhaps weren't deliberate. They just happened because people didn't know better. So there's no forgiveness here. Green becomes just as punitive and punishing as blue was at one point. So out of that sensitivity that turns really insensitive comes yellow, which says, wait a minute. It's not that every hierarchy is a dominator hierarchy. Some hierarchies are natural hierarchies. And we ought to be able to assess, evaluate, and come up with more strategic, contextual solutions to our problems. Not everyone is not the same. And we can take a morally, ethically sincere perspective on that. Okay. And so I would say that's just where the higher integral stages, both yellow and turquoise, begin. Out of a need to include all of the gifts of the first tier stages, and wanting as much as possible to welcome the entire spiral, make the entire spiral healthier. really honor the whole spiral. So beige to blue were pre-modern, prior to modernity. So there are some of the oldest archetypes or oldest ways of being, mindsets, worldviews in this world. Orange is the modern worldview. Green is postmodern. Next comes the integral stages. Beige and purple are pre-egoic. Red is very egocentric. Blue is ethnocentric. Orange and green and yellow are far more world-centric. They're able to include the world far more than any of the other stages. The turquoise is said to be cosmocentric. And so, as we've talked about, these first six stages are the first tier stages. And then comes the second tier stages. And there are lots of other patterns and all kinds of, things I can say, but I think I will stop with this. And maybe we can open up for questions, Q&A. What do you think? Oh, somebody, I feel like someone's trying to say something, but I don't know where. Anton,
I would also want to just say, in case anyone needs to leave right away, if you give us your email address, we can send you a recording of this session. And we would
Yes.
love to do that.
Nomali at, oh, you mean to say, yeah. If you want to get a recording of this, please put the address into the chat. Oh, I've been muted again. Sorry. Be mute here. Okay. Anton, you had a question?
I think, yeah, I'm okay. I'm unmuted. Yeah, I had a question about, I think this is stage turquoise. I tried to think about how to word this. So it seems like it's very conscious of the nature of reality, or thinking about things that are like that, very broad. And it's saying that the nature of reality has the self and the collective coexisting, if I understand that correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Was there a question there, or what was that the question?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to figure out how to word it, because nature of reality, how abstract it is, and not a limitless spiritual context or spiritual way, even though it's encompassing the spiritual. I understand. How can I
Yes.
say this?
All
So that's
encompassing is a really good word, phrase. It's all encompassing. It can actually include more. And there's no demand that something be spiritual. I think at the higher stages, there's a natural tendency for things to feel a little more spiritual because there's less ego. There's a sort of a deconstruction of the self going on. But it certainly doesn't mean that spirituality has to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having a spiritual view does help in the sense that if we don't see spirituality in the higher stages, then I worry that we may not be able to integrate the traditional blue stage, which is very religious.
Mm-hmm.
I think we ought to be able to include them, and the way we can do that is from opening to the spiritual realm as we continue to evolve. Otherwise, I think we'll continue to clamp down on the religious stages.
Mm-hmm. And how there's overlap between, that's one thing I've been realizing over time myself. And you said it during the presentation as well. There's a certain amount of overlap between what religion can practice and what we call spiritual that is not strictly religious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think as we grow, as we evolve, we don't need to practice a religion per se from a sort of a fundamentalist, dogmatic kind of place. But when we get more evolved, there is a much more deeper way in which we see religion. Jesus wasn't trying to tell everybody that you should only love Christians. Jesus, but at a fundamentalist blue traditional stage, that worldview might see that that's the message of Christianity, or like it's, you know, like the Al-Qaeda, for example, or ISIS have a very fundamentalist idea of Islam. But I think a lot of us here will probably recognize that Islam isn't just that. There's a much higher way in which people can practice Islam and interpret Islam. So that's what I mean for any religion. So when we are at a higher level of development, we can return to religion from a higher perspective, from a deeper discernment, and really kind of really plunge into the depth of that religion fully, with no shame, with no guilt.
Makes sense. Makes sense to me. Thank you.
And thanks for coming for all 3 sessions.
Yeah, yeah.
You're being here. Thank you.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Good presentation. Great presentation,
Thank
in fact.
you. Thank you. I know it's a little late, but I'm happy to be here to take a couple more questions if anybody wants to stay. Anyone who wants to leave, thank you so much for joining. Nina?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you stop throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yes. Yes. I like that. Yep. That's an integral statement. Yes.
Hard on the baby, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Dragpa?
Wow, thank you so much, Nomali. Just lovely. It was beautiful, really beautiful. I had a question about kind of the container or the community or the ecology, the incubator, like in terms of kind of opening into how you're kind of comparing a bit like the yellow and the turquoise. A lot of the turquoise characteristics like surrendering, trust, humility, forgiveness, those are just really deeply earned. It's just that in any kind of talk around that is like, usually if someone gets there, it really asks a lot of that person to really do that. So have you found any general patterns for what would be supportive of that kind of a transition?
I think the first thing is I would say not just for turquoise, but for any stage to evolve, right? To meet anybody where they're at is the trick, is to really be loving. And it's sort of, don't call them deplorables, for example. You know, don't call them sort of gun-toting, God-hogging idiots, or, you know, something like that. This is what often politicians end up doing, and they dig a massive hole. Imagine if there are politicians who can go into blue, orange, and green and speak to all of them lovingly, acceptingly. I hear your pain. I know you are concerned because you have a deep love of God, or you have a deep love of safety and security. You have a deep love of truth. You have a deep love of inclusivity. Imagine if our politicians were able to do that. So I think that's not just to enter second tier, but just to become healthier exactly how you are at, which is the opening to the next stage. Jolene?
I have a question for you, Nomali, but I just wanted to respond to Dragpa that I think one of the best techniques is just to call your own self out, you know, just to create humility is just to own your own gaslighting. And anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. But I was wondering if you could put up that graphic contrasting the yellow and the turquoise, because I wanted to take a screenshot of it, and I was doing something when you moved on from that.
Yep, let's see. So I'll also here's I think this is the one you were speaking about, right?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll also just put this link into the chat field if any of you are interested. this is a video in which I contrast yellow and turquoise quite a bit. By the way, I apologize, I haven't kept up with all the messages on the chat field. This is a video in which Jeff Salzman and I talk about the shadow of integral of these higher levels of development. But towards the end of that video, maybe the last 20 minutes or so of that video, I go through a list of how I see the differences between yellow and turquoise. So it's a much bigger list than just that little list that I put on the slideshow. I'll also just mention, if anybody's interested in kind of diving a little bit deeper than we have in this in these 3 series, if you want to go deeper into each stage, here's a series of videos that my colleague Lee Mason and I have created on every single stage, including the history of how spiral dynamics came into being, and also the choral stage, a little bit about the choral stage, which we didn't talk about in this series, and also the dangers of how we use and misuse spiral dynamics is also, there are videos for all of those topics. Cheryl.
Well, I'll give a shout out for those videos that you and Lee did. I thought those were excellent. I really got an awful lot out of those. But I'm just wondering about, like just how our own particular personalities fit into something like this. Because I look at yellow and turquoise and I just think, boy, do I ever resonate with turquoise. Right? And there's qualities there that I certainly feel a lot more resonant with than yellow. And I just think, is there a danger then of actually not integrating something that doesn't feel like a lot of the yellow to, the heady stuff, the more analytical, systematic, just doesn't feel as attractive to me, actually. And we think, is there, does that get in the way of horizontal development?
I think this is where just kind of having our own practice, like I think how Jolene was talking a little bit about it. I think as we evolve, just really being willing to commit to a community of the adequate or a community of practitioners so that we can sort of check with each other. Like having a wonderful women's group, for example, or something, where we can actually check in with each other. We can show up as we are and invite feedback. So when we are sort of traveling too fast, maybe, or trying to get somewhere that we're trying to kind of hurry that, if we are deeply self-aware, I think we'll catch ourselves. And be forgiving of ourselves also. I think that I too, just by personality. So I think there is every stage from, so if every alternating stage is said to be either sort of thinking oriented or feeling oriented. So thinking oriented are beige, red, orange, and yellow. So all of the warm colors of the spiral are kind of a little bit more penetrating, analytical thinking sort of oriented. So that's a little bit like related to personality. Some of us might resonate less with that. Some of us more with that. Purple, blue, green, and turquoise, all cool colors, are said to be more feeling oriented, more heart-centered. So personality wise, we might just connect with that. I think that's where the integral map is really valuable, because we get to see stages and types as different entities. So for those of you who don't know that, don't worry about it. But for those of us who know the integral map, I think there are like 2 different things. And yes, we can run into trouble because our personality is resonating with certain qualities of stages. But I think with practice, with self-awareness, with inviting or being a part of community, we ought to be willing to be humble and kind of check it with others, check it with ourselves. Yeah. But I will also say, Cheryl, that the resonance could also just simply be that you have turquoise tendencies as a stage. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments, complaints? All right.
Oh.
Nina, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna, I mean, I'm just clarifying that we, whatever stage we're at, like often, we still float up and down in the other stages, depending on context and everything, because I sometimes hear my say something and I go, you know, and other times I think, well, wow, you know, that, and recognizing that that's the self-awareness part, recognizing that, oh, I can slip into any of these, and then using that understanding that I can go there, that I can, you know, my own personal, if I can shift up and down, so can the people that I'm out there watching thinking, oh, they're so blue, or oh, it's like, yeah, in that moment, whatever it is that they're caring about, they might be that way. And maybe in other areas, they're not. And that's right. That's really helping me to say, you know, like, if I'm doing that, so is everybody else probably.
Yes.
Yeah, they're not like at that level. We're all doing that. And that gives me so much hope.
Yes. And it's really the integral level of development that brings up mostly, starting around green, practices like doing our shadow work, because there's a recognition we can repress, we can regress. And like I said at the very beginning, these stages are not like rungs in a ladder. They're far more fluid, flowing, and we have access to all of the stages, really. There are mutations in the way that Jean Gebser might want to talk about the stages, not so much as sequential necessarily, but rather like walking through the rooms of a museum, and that different rooms have different kinds of art, and we enjoy all of it. If nothing, I think something I hope could happen when we learn about stages is that our hearts break, because we see the spiral as a place of needing so much healing, but also our hearts break in joy in what gifts each stage has to offer. And how sad if we are not embracing all of it, you know. So let our hearts break.
Yeah, you know, you were asking for questions and comments, and what was coming up for me was words fail. You know, they're such, you know, what is the right word? And I was going to ask, what is your body bringing up? You know, what's happening to your heart? Or do you feel like your mind is expanding? When we watched that Nelson Mandela clip there, it was like the feeling of, oh, let's take flight here, you know. And I'm just curious if there are any body expressions that you could put words to, if anyone would want to give a testimony of, you know, are your shoulders feeling more relaxed, or, you know, what is your body telling you as you have witnessed one or two or three of these sessions that we've had this experience? If anyone would want to speak to that.
Well, I can just simply say, so I had this amazing opportunity to teach these things in person sometimes, and in Brazil, in Mexico, and here very much in Boulder as well. And sometimes when we're doing this in person, we bring in more aspects of the body, because we're actually, like, you know, walking around in a room, for example. So for example, when we are doing blue, sometimes I've had people get out of the room, like go for tea break or something, and when they come back, we would move the chairs into these tight, like straight lines. Very you know, usually when we go into a conference room, the chairs are sort of laid out in a little bit of a curved and maybe in a circle or something like that, at least in Boulder. But we turned them into like church pews, and people walk into the rooms like, what the hell? Why did they place the chairs like this? That's because we're trying to actually get people into that blue conformist, there's a way in which you should sit, you know. And then at Orange, we'll try to really create hierarchies, like different kinds of hierarchies, like go like line up according to height to begin with, a safe way. But then just see if you can line up according to your wealth. It's like, oops, ouch, all kinds of discomfort in the body and, you know, that kind of thing. So we'll try to put people into circles. The way that we experience our body, when that type of configuration is introduced, you actually feel the stage in your body. Purple, small circles, holding hands, sitting around a fire kind of energy. It's very different, the sense of security that you feel in your little tribe. So yeah, I mean, I think it's all definitely highly psychosomatic. The red, you remember the Eminem song that I played for Red? That is, you feel the red in your body. And then after that, I played a video of Beyonce walking in that perfume commercial, sexy, you know, that you just completely feel that in the body, you know. So you can definitely feel that. When I was working in Brazil, I had all of the stages represented through cosmetics commercials. That's why I still have some of those perfume commercials, because that company that I worked for was one of Brazil's biggest cosmetics companies. So I still remember for Blue, when I had to find a commercial for perfume, like something that gave out the blue energy, I actually found an Indonesian talcum powder commercial, which was really sweet. It was like the mother and the father getting ready to go to work, and the little boy running up to the parents, and it was just a very family kind of thing. It was not about like sexy perfumes. So so yeah, you can find these energies everywhere. Yeah. So I don't know if I missed anything. If some of you have put things into the chat that you'd really like me to answer, please just speak up, because I think I've lost track of the chat field. But okay.
I think another gold mine that you opened up, Nomali, was just the theme of the communications between the different colors. And if we could get really good at communicating with each other with a greater awareness of what the values are of the different stages, that would be a valuable resource for us to have. I don't know how much literature there is available on that. Maybe some people in this room need to get their PhD in that, and just really practice at communicating with each other, no matter what stage we might be coming from or speaking with.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't hear everything you were saying, Hardy, but I think you were talking about communication. You might have to figure out the communication through your mic, I think. Yeah, no, but it's okay. I think I could somehow manage. Communication is really just huge in learning this spiral. It's like we look at other stages and are something crazy that they're doing, or we perceive it as crazy or not like how I would do things. And so like, instead of saying like, why, like, now, why would you do that? Instead of saying it like that, I like how Jeff Salzman often says, why would you do it like that? It's a completely different tone. You really bring curiosity to, wow, why is it that you would do it like that? Our natural tendency is to say like, why the hell would they do it like that? It's because I'm coming from this place of, I already know how it ought to be done. And you don't seem to do it like that. So there's one other, like a really big thing that I kind of forgot to mention, but I think it's worthy of just saying it even now. So we talked about turquoise, which resembles green a lot. The biggest difference between green and turquoise is that green is very sensitive, and it is very it wants to include everyone. Unfortunately, green digs a hole for itself because it wants to include only those who think like them. So green loves to do diversity, inclusivity, and all of that, but unfortunately, they will dismiss anyone who doesn't feel like that, who doesn't think like that. And it's hard to do. It's hard to, you understand why green would dismiss that, but turquoise is actually trying to bring real inclusion. So where we are trying to include all of the 2S LGBTQIAA, I know the Canadian way of saying that. Turquoise would say there are people who are against that, but I want to know them as well. I want to learn about them as well. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, why is it a threat?
Why is what a threat?
Well, asking yourself, when somebody's anti anything, stopping and going, well, I wonder why that's a threat to them.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about? And I would love to learn to do that. So
Yep.
I'm curious. I watched a little clip of Pete Buttigieg talking about something that, and he was so incredibly gracious and forgiving, and I was like, who is this guy that he can like just always come off with this really, he must be an Enneagram 9 or something, because he's so diplomatic. I just can't believe some of the stuff that comes out of his mouth. It's like, I want to be like that. You know, I want to be like that, but I'm not there.
Yeah, there's a kind of a spiral wizardry when you can really truly just bring curiosity. If you can't love every stage, at the very least, I hope we can bring curiosity. You know, yeah.
That's how you learn to love it.
Yes.
Is by being curious.
Yes. Because you know what? Because if you really communicate with that other stage, what you'll find out is that I have the exact same fear. Yeah.
Wow. Blessings. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's maybe call it a night. Is that a good place to end, Hardy?
It's beautiful. I also want to thank you, Nomali. I want to really appreciate the cross-pollination here between Integral Life and Heart Commonness. And I'm curious where that might go as well. So you from the ethnicity of Integral Life, you have brought so much to this conversation. I thank each of you just very specially.
Thank you.
It's just a lovely thing. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night. We will offer some possibilities for where we go from here, and would love to hear from you about that. So we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sweetsy. Everybody, thank you so much for lots of great comments, and I really appreciate hearing that, and hopefully more to come. Good night, everyone. Take care. Bye.